Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today for flies, a small insect that packs a big food safety punch. Before we start, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping and mention that everyone's audio and video is turned off. If you'd like to ask some questions, please do. You can either use the chat function or the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And I will be monitoring these throughout the session, and we will have time at the end to answer questions. This webinar is brought to you by the Food and Beverage Business Accelerator Program. My name is Pam Laffin, and I'm a food safety specialist with Perennia Food and Agriculture. We are Nova Scotia's only development agency with the focus on agriculture and seafood. We offer consulting services in food safety to assist with program development, implementation, and training. We also offer services in agriculture extension, mobile wine bottling, and analytical testing of cannabis, foods, and beverages. Our innovation team works with clients on product development, process improvement, nutritional labeling, and shelf life determination. We all know that flies are annoying. Who hasn't had that one fly that seems to continuously fly around your head or fall into their glass of wine? Flies are much more than that. They are a big food safety issue. Chelle will talk about the most common species of pest flies and where they are most often found. This wouldn't be pest control if we also didn't talk about how to manage them as well. Chelle is a consulting entomologist at 360 Pest and Food Safety Consulting, located in Atlanta, Georgia, and has been working with pest management industry for over a decade. She helps companies in food, healthcare, hospitality, and other industries to solve tough pest problems, evaluate their current pest programs, and put preventative plans in place to work better with their pest control teams. Chelle holds a Bachelor of Science in Entomology with a Wildlife Conservation concentration from the University of Delaware and a Master of Science in Entomology from Kansas State University, as well as being a board-certified entomologist in urban and structural entomology. She is also a preventive controls qualified individual and has earned her Lean Six Sigma Green Belt. As I mentioned, we will have time for questions at the end. And now I will hand it over to you, Chelle.
Woohoo! Yeah, definitely drop those questions into the chat or the Q&A box. And if I see them, I will try and get to them. But this is so much fun and I get so involved in it. So, I miss it sometimes. I will warn you folks that flies are gross. And as such, there are some pretty gross pictures in here. And most of them are mine that I've taken. And it gives you an idea that this is real world. I mean, this is not just something that somebody threw together. I mean, these pictures are stuff that I've taken in food facilities, in restaurants, in places. So just be warned, it's 2 o'clock there. So, hopefully most of you have had lunch, but it can be a lot. So there's your warning. All right, so when we talk about flies, we have a lot of different flies that are out there. So what we typically do is kind of categorize them as the small flies, and then we have the large flies. And of course, this is all kind of relative. Our small flies are, kind of about the size of a fruit fly. That's what we consider small. And our large flies are about, housefly size. Now, I'm going to throw up a lot of pretty pictures here and show you all these real quick, but honestly, I'm not going to talk too much about how to identify it because there's lots of great resources out there for you that you can do that with. And again, some of these are pretty small. You may need a microscope to actually look at some of these categories. But again, for our small flies, what we tend to do we tend to have these little fruit flies. And of course, with fruits, with vegetables, with wine, a whole bunch of stuff that these are definitely going to be attracted to. And actually, they're not actually attracted to the fruit or the vegetable itself. They're actually attracted to the alcohols as they start to break down. They're actually feeding off of that. So they're little drunkards. I love them. And then we have forage flies. These things are usually after sewage. They're usually after the really gross stuff, those dirty drains, sewage leaks, sewage treatment plants. They're into that gross stuff. And then we have little moth flies. These are typically, these are also called drain flies. They are correctly supposed to be moth flies, but again, a lot of drains, but it's actually sort of cleaner drains. But, I've mentioned that all these, the kind of decaying fruits and vegetables, drains, sewage, you can see that there's always going to be that component of moisture there. So then for our large flies, we have a couple more. These are, again, it's hard to say what kind of flies you are specifically going to have in your facilities. So I've kind of taken the most common here. And of course, house flies. Nobody has not seen a house fly, and these things are gross. They carry a lot of bacteria, viruses, and other fun stuff that we'll talk about. And then we have flesh flies. You can imagine with a name like flesh fly, what they tend to feed on. And, we see these adults, but we're going to get into a little bit more. It's really the larvae that are doing all the feeding. I mean, the adults will feed a little bit on some nectar, some protein sources, kind of soft, squishy stuff, liquids, but it's really the larvae that are doing the damage. These, I've always thought these are so pretty with that kind of metallic green, there'll be metallic blue colors, are the blowflies. And these are always going to be on decomposition. It's going to be a dead animal usually that they are attracted to, and that's what's going on there. And then soldier flies are a little weird, and I almost didn't put this one in, but soldier flies have really distinctive larvae. And what happens is once those larvae are about ready to pupate, they actually come out from their food source, kind of travel away to drier areas. And that's when people start to see them. So I wanted to put a picture of soldier flies in there too, just for reference. Again, lots of good resources out there. You're always welcome to send me some pictures and we can get to that. And the reason why we go through some of this identification, even though it's super quick, is because that's where they're going to be found. So if you don't know what species you're dealing with, if you don't know the difference between a fruit fly and a forage fly, you could be looking in the wrong place for the source of these problems and wasting a whole bunch of time. So if we know what species it is, that gets us to that food source, to that breeding site a lot faster, which means we can take care of the problem faster. That's always a good thing. Just wanted to throw this in. We have everything else out there. I mean, you open a door and literally anything can fly or walk its way in. So, when you're looking at an insect light trap, you're looking at a sticky board and all this fun stuff that shows up on them. Again, this identification standpoint is important because if it is just something that accidentally walked in the door, well, we don't have to find the source. We just have to close the door. But if it's one of those other ones, we need to start searching around and trying to find that source. So, oops, I went through all this. Damsel flies. This one is really cool. If you've never heard of scorpion flies are amazing little creatures and they look so cool. But I'm an entomologist, so of course I think they look cool. All right, so that's the quick and dirty on identification and what you might see. So who cares? I mean, what difference does it make if there's a fly in your facility? Flies are definitely carriers of disease, specifically foodborne illnesses. And this is talking about fruit flies specifically. They actually, up until, I don't know, about 5-10 years ago, they thought that the small flies like fruit flies were, potentially carrying stuff around, but they didn't actually know. So this paper tested it and showed conclusively that E. coli, salmonella, listeria, all of these things could be taken from an infested food source. The fly flies around, lands on a non-infested food source. Now it's infested with these things. So they've conclusively said, this is going to spread foodborne illnesses around. We definitely know that the large flies, particularly the house flies, do it. So we definitely have some agencies to worry about. You probably have a health industry health inspections, different types of inspections that are going to look for this. And I put this one in. I know we're not dealing with you folks with restaurants, but restaurants are fun. This is actually in my county, and again, this can shut you down. Even though this is a restaurant, this can shut food facilities down if auditors come in, if auditors find some of this stuff. And of course, if you have those problems, it usually means there's something really gross going on that is supporting these populations. This is a great one. Hospitals. I mean, do you want to have an operation in a hospital that's got flies flying around the operating room? Probably not. So, and this one is just great. House flies. 65 different diseases just for humans. Okay, take that in for a minute. That means that they can pick up these little particles and they can transfer them to a clean surface. So when you imagine these coming in from the outside, think of what they've been feeding on the outside and what they're potentially bringing into your facility. Like I said, a lot of sewage, a lot of dead animals, a lot of crap that these things are feeding on. And that's where they're picking up a lot of these gross things that are then transferring to you. So let me make sure I've got this on mute. Oops, mute. There we go. So I wanted to show this because again, this is a housefly and you can see that large surface area of its mouth that's getting in there. And you know, you always hear that they regurgitate onto their food. They do have a little bit of like an enzyme that they release that helps kind of break that down, because you can see from those mouth parts, they can't eat solid food. They can only slurp up the liquid. So if it is a hard item, you know, they can release a little bit of that enzyme to kind of liquefy it. But you also see those legs and you see how it keeps preening itself, how it keeps cleaning. So that housefly is going to land on something infected with salmonella. And then it's going to go to the next source and you're going to see it clean off its little legs and wash off its little face. And it's going to drop those particles. And this is how it starts to spread around. And again, just really interesting to see those mouth parts and all those hairs on the leg that are just almost magnets to, you know, attract these little particles and do their thing. So love that one. Again, you get a nice close look on what that housefly's mouth parts look like. Let me go back right there. I mean, just look at that. That's, you see them sucking up that little bit. They don't eat a lot in one place. You know, they like to taste a little bit here, taste a little bit there. You know, so they're going to be landing on a lot of different surfaces, and all it takes is one. So this is a food safety issue. Whether it's fruits and vegetables, whether it's meat, whether it's, Pam and I were talking about maple syrup earlier. I mean, all of this stuff could be affected by these diseases. And of course, Listeria, E. coli, Salmonella are, you know, pretty damaging things to have. And we don't want recalls and we don't want people, you know, getting sick from our products. So we do have to think about flies, and we do have to obviously think about the control aspect of it. Oh, and this is just another one. Great. They tested a whole bunch of flying insects in a hospital. This was done in Great Britain. And what they found is that some of the insects that they tested had multi-drug resistant bacteria. So not just like, okay, this is resistant to penicillin. This was multi-drug resistant bacteria. So this is really dangerous when it comes to that. And this is a great one too. Again, I know you're working in food facilities, but this is pretty much the same in food facilities when we're finding 9 out of 10 flying insects in hospitals carry harmful bacteria. So again, your facility is just as susceptible to this as hospitals. It's kind of weird. I did this presentation up a couple days ago and I forget what videos I had in there, so it's fun. So again, we see here, we've got our flies that are, you know, this is, if you can see it, it is a dead animal in there, but they like that stuff. And, you know, that is where they're going to lay their eggs. That is where the larvae are going to breed. And that adult is just going to keep going from food source to food source, laying a couple more eggs, depositing a couple more larvae. And look at that great close up of those mouth parts. Look at all that surface area. So, and this you can tell from that kind of green, silvery green on it was a blowfly. So we know those are going after carrion, after dead animals for the most part. Look at them clean his little legs there. They'll clean off their face. They'll rub down their antennae, and kind of almost like a cat. And this is what we have then. We have larvae. We have maggots. And they're going to sit in there. And you notice again that wetness, that moisture. They need something. Flies are always going to be in something moist. They're never going to be in like a perfectly dry area. And you can see, obviously this is time lapse, but how much damage they can do when there's a lot of larvae there. This is coming out of its pupal stage. They have that little pupal cocoon, good stuff on there. And then this one's going to go on to do the same thing. It's going to find a friend. It's going to lay some eggs. Whole process starts all over again. So that's a great way to look at the maggots and to see, how that life cycle works. All right, so that's why we should care. I mean, again, we don't want insects in the foods. We don't want insects in our facility, but flies in particular with that health risk, that is really something to think about. And again, that goes back to identification of which species may be coming from where and where some of those sources are of what types of food safety issues they may be bringing around. Okay, so what do we do about this? Because, I mean, we've got flies, we got to do something, right? So we start with inspection. Well, actually, we start with identification, but we already did that part. So we have to start looking where it's most likely that they're coming from. And I've already mentioned a couple of times that moisture, that moist organic material is what they're going after. Now, that moist organic material could be crap. That moist organic material could be decaying fruit. Depends on the species, depends on what you're going for. So, oops, I want to go back to this because, again, these are fruit fly larvae and pupa. The dark ones are the pupa, so they've already gotten to that cocoon stage. But you see some of the larvae in there too, and they're just going to town on that potato. And this is that potato is going to break down much more rapidly. And as stuff breaks down, it's going to be a little bit more liquidy, attract more flies, and it's all the great circle of life. I mentioned that a lot of these pictures are mine. This is a picture from a food facility. And this is what we're talking about when we say moist organic material. It's often in the drains, but it's not always in the drains. But you get that buildup of material and the flies are just like, woohoo, I got my home and I'm nice and safe tucked inside all of this organic material, which makes it hard to treat them because if you were to try and treat this drain with a pesticide, well, the ones on the surface of the gook, may get knocked down, but you have all the other ones that are inside the gooky mess that are never going to get contacted. So, finding these areas and cleaning them is really one of the best bets. But of course, that gets difficult. So one of the other places that I see a lot, especially small flies, is trash cans, which you would think, okay, why would I ever have flies in the trash can? Because we put the liner in there, we do our thing, we take it out, on a regular basis. What happens is that liner leaks, or that liner had a tear in it, or it tore when you came out. And suddenly the bottom of that trash bin starts accumulating this material. And of course, somebody threw a soda bottle in there that was half full. So now you've got the moisture down there, breaking down those hot dog buns. I don't know what they are. And that population can start up very rapidly. When we talk about the small flies, our small flies can develop from egg to adult stage in as little as 7 days. 7 days. Imagine that, if you don't take the trash out for 10 days, what's going to happen? The larger flies usually take about 3 to 4 weeks, depending on conditions, but still, that's pretty rapid when you think of that. So when we talk about inspection, it really is to kind of look everywhere, but at the same time, how could you possibly look at everything all the time? You have jobs to do. So again, focusing on some of those key areas where there might be some sanitation issues, where, if we knew it was fruit flies, well, where are our fruits and vegetables? Kind of narrowing it down a little bit to start looking for those areas. again, I'm probably making it seem easy, like, oh, we got fruit flies, let's go look at the bananas. But you may have 6 dozen types of fruits or vegetables in your facility, and they're spread out everywhere. And who knows where these things could be? This inspection process is not easy. So if I'm making it sound easy, trust me, it's not. So I mentioned, we had the maggots, we have that nice life stage. And when we talk about that, it's a little challenging because what you're going to see first is obviously the adults. You're going to see the adults flying around, that annoying little housefly that just won't leave you alone. That's what's going to happen. But what you have to do is focus on the larvae. You have to focus on the immature stages, because you can knock down a bunch of flies, hey, we knocked down the 20 flies that were there, but you still have those 10,000 larvae that are inside this piece of gook that you now haven't taken care of, that in about 3 weeks are going to become these adults again. So when we're inspecting, yes, we can look for those large flies, but we have to also find those maggots. We also have to find that food source, because if we don't, we're just putting a Band-Aid on it, basically. And this is great. Again, you can see those adults there. We've got blowflies. You can see some of the eggs actually, and those maggots just going to town. They are great little decomposers. And out in the wild, this is a good thing. I mean, this is great. We want stuff to break down, all those nutrients return to the soil, but at the same time, those bringing that disease inside is a problem. So with something like this, we may see the adults and they may be relatively close to that food source that they're depositing their eggs on, but they also fly very well, especially these large flies. So looking where the adult fly isn't necessarily where you're going to find that food source and find the larvae. It's a good place to start, like, hey, we found 10 flies over in that corner and nothing in this corner. Okay, start in that corner. Makes perfect sense. But if you're kind of finding them scattered all over in different light traps, different areas, it's going to make that inspection a bit harder. Look at all that. I mean, it's amazing how many there are there that are just breaking that down, that there's almost no competition for food source in there. So when we talk about inspecting, you have to find the adults, but more importantly, if you can find the larvae, and that may be close, that may be far away. And I think I was supposed to put up another picture in there, but hey, I didn't. For the small flies, it's a lot easier because the small flies do not fly as well. So, they're seeing the adults, seeing that fruit fly, seeing that forward fly, it's going to be pretty close to the source of them. So that makes it a little bit easier. But with the large flies, it's a lot harder because they do fly very well. And sometimes when you have like really strong air currents, your small flies may have gotten pushed farther away from where they actually are, but who knows? We also kind of have to think outside the box. Okay. So, we say that shut the doors and clean out the drains and stuff like that. But a lot of times these things are coming from outside. So again, to kind of look at that last video, let me get back here a minute. To look at that last video, you saw that was a piece of carrion. That was a dead animal. It was outside. But those large flies can then pick up all those bacteria, all that nasty stuff, and bring it inside. So when you have those large flies, again, you're probably not looking inside for a bunch of dead animals. Now, I have had some facilities that have had this problem. I've had some facilities where, usually a bit older facilities, something has crawled in and died in a wall void, died underneath the facility, and suddenly we have these things coming in because it's so close. So every once in a while, they are in the facility. If you do any meat processing, of course, you've got dead animals there that you're processing. So you may have some issues with these. Again, keeping them away from that food source is going to be really important. But for a lot of you, again, depending on what you're producing, what you're packing, what you're holding, this is typically going to be an outside issue. And so when you start to see these inside, you have to go outside the nearest door, find that larval source, seal up the doors, get rid of the dead stuff, and the fly problem goes away. I really love dealing with small flies because they are, as easy as they are to find sometimes, they are super difficult. What's illustrating here is a site that I was at. They were having a very big problem with forage flies. And if you remember back, forage flies are typically feeding on sewage. So human sewage, manure, anything like that. And what was happening is we were finding these kind of in the middle of a food processing facility. Like they weren't by doors. It wasn't really close to any drains. And what happened is underneath the facility, one of these pipes broke and the sewage was getting into the soil. The flies were finding the food source, and the adults, when they hatch, were coming up through tiny, tiny little cracks in the floor. It's amazing how small of an area that they can get to. And what had to happen is they had to dig this all out, not just to repair the pipe, but also to remove all that soil. And of course, with sewage, with waste, you're dealing with a lot of nasty pathogens that can then get transported in. So this particular one, again, this is a pretty big break. There are often times where it's a little crack, or a fitting came just a little bit loose. And if it's enough to get that sewage out of there and those flies can find it, this is what's happening. So again, we typically say small flies are coming from inside a facility. Their source is going to be inside a facility, but in some cases it may be outside. All right, embarrassingly enough, this is my house. And you can see with all this vegetation, especially right up against the side of a building, so much can be living in here. And what's happening with all that vegetation is actually keeping the moisture in. So that soil is going to stay a lot moister. We have all that vegetation breaking down. So we have that food source. That food source is now right up against the facility. And this is why it's so important to have that vegetation-free border around your site. Great for all the pests that are out there, but specifically thinking about flies, that keeps the vegetation, the decay, the wetness away from those facilities just a little bit more. It took me about 3 years to completely rip this out. It was miserable, but it's much better now. But think about that. Think about not just what's going on inside your facility, but think about what may be going on directly outside. It can help, again, depending on what species of fly that you have. Again, this was to go back to that, the pipe burst. This actually seemed to be sealed pretty well. The first time we went into that facility that was finding the forage flies, this looked like it was sealed pretty well. I mean, there was nothing in there that was a food material that the larvae could be feeding on. We kind of dug down a little bit and didn't find any larvae in there, but there were small enough cracks in this joint that the adults could get in through. So it was absolutely miserable dealing with this problem, again, because it was a major construction issue at that point, and the facility did have to shut down for about a week. So you can imagine the downtime that causes and the money that gets lost if you have to deal with that. So I don't know, look at your pipes, inspect your pipes every once in a while. So that inspection aspect is very important, again, to find that larval source, to find where the larvae are feeding, that grossness, that muck, whatever it is. Again, drains are a very big one, especially if you do any type of wet processing. It's a big one. Stuff gets flushed down the drain, so, and it gets stuck in there. So if you're not on a good drain cleaning process, this could get missed. And again, small flies, about 7 days to develop. So you can imagine what your drain cleaning program should be if you're having a problem with some of these small flies. Okay, so we've determined that these are a food safety issue. We've determined that after we identify, we've got to inspect to find that source. And then what comes next is treatment. Okay, and one of the best treatments for flies is sanitation, which again, I'm making sound super easy. Just find the gook, clean up the gook, all your problems go away. 2 problems with that. 1, you work with food, which means there's going to be food sources. And 2, finding the sources of these can be really, really tricky sometimes. This was actually a pretty obvious one that we found pretty quick, and you can see all this gunk around this pipe. It's kind of even burst out of that little styrofoam thing there. this was fairly easy to clean up. And this was mostly fruit flies, I think, if I remember this one right. So again, fairly small area, fairly easy to find it, fairly easy to clean up. But if you remember what I said, especially about the small flies, they're really adept at getting into stuff. And this is a picture, again, in a food facility. This was a food processing facility, a little bit older because it had all these tiles, but all the grout between the tiles had broken down. And what that meant is that every night when they washed the floor, some of that gunk, some of that wet organic material starts filling in where the grout isn't. It stays wet, stays damp, it's a food source, and the larvae were getting into that and literally feeding on the cracks and crevices inside those tiles and becoming a problem. So in this particular facility, because it was so widespread, they had to rip out all the tiling and put in a new floor. So they didn't do it right away, but they did eventually. So, and drains. Drain cleaning is very, very important because you don't often see inside drains. I mean, when we see something like this, it's easy. You know, we look down at our feet and we can see, okay, the grout's missing and there's gunky stuff in there. But when we're talking about drains, we often don't see it. We see the top of the drain and we don't open it and we don't look down. Well, I do because I'm a geek and this is what I do to find these things. But you know, you don't often take up that grate and find all that gunky mess that's in there. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. It's like me. I never clean the top of my refrigerator because I can't see the top of my refrigerator. So it doesn't matter to me. However, the top of my refrigerator is not breeding flies. When it comes to these small flies in particular, getting those drains cleaned, especially on a regular basis, 7-day development period, is going to be important to break that life cycle. And when we talk about cleaning the drains, it's not just dumping a little bit of drain cleaner down there. A lot of people are like, well, I have bleach. No, forget the bleach. Bleach is not going to work. You need something foaming. You need that foaming to stick there. Think of your drains at home. Okay, when something gets a little stuck up, you know, you can pour some liquid down there and maybe that can break it up. But if you get that foam action going, it sticks to the side and it really breaks it down instead of just kind of flushing it through. So you get a much better clean that way, and that can break the life cycle. You're still going to flush more down that drain over the next week, but you keep breaking that cycle, keep flushing those larvae down and out, you're not going to have the problems that you could have. So consider that. Sanitation, super important. Finding the sanitation issue, not always obvious, and sometimes not always fixable. When you think about drains, think about some of this stuff. It's not like you can have somebody cleaning that drain 24/7. So you're always going to have some gunk in there. You're always going to have that buildup, but making it small enough and flushing it regularly can help that problem. Then we move on to exclusion. Okay, let's keep these things out. You know, why even let them in the facility in the first place? Particularly our large flies, which are going to be breeding on the dead stuff and the waste stuff outside. Let's keep them on the outside. Oops. Yeah, let's keep them on the outside. Just go on. Check your doors, check your windows. If you have any screening, you know, little breaks in that screening can let these things in. And chances are you probably have some good smells that are coming out of your site. So they're attracted to some of the scents, some of the stuff because you have good food in there. Maybe it's producing it, maybe it's packing it, whatever it is. Those scents can be pushed out and can be a little bit of an attraction. So making sure these seals are all sealed up, especially around the edges. One of the things I find a lot is they're like, yeah, we just installed this screen. Isn't it great? And I'm like, yeah, you got a gap this big on the edge, so they can fly right around your screen. So make sure when these things are installed, they're installed correctly. Yeah, this one, I see this all the time. And this was a problem with flies. You can't see it, but there is a dumpster that is just outside the door on the left. And I love it because every time I see this, there's a sign on the door that says this door is to remain closed and locked at all times. And people don't do it. I always see them propped open. You can see that they've got trash bins right outside. So what was happening is this was during the summer too, so populations were really high. They propped this door open, and of course the flies were getting into the kitchen. Of course they were getting in. So, you know, it sounds stupid to say shut the damn doors, but at the same time, how many times have you seen the door propped open? How many times have your employees been like, just going out for a quick smoke, I don't want to have to go around, all the way around the building to the front, and they'll prop a door open. This is what lets these things in. And all kinds of pests. I mean, something like this, I mean, you can get mice, you can get rats, I mean, anything can walk in. People can walk in, they're big enough pests as well. So looking at all that stuff, when we talk, oh, geez, keep going too fast. I'm so excited. When we talk about small flies, you know, we talk about exclusion as kind of like sealing the outside on the outside, not letting any of that outside stuff inside our box. But we can look at exclusion a little bit from the small fly perspective as excluding some of the inside spaces. Again, this is something that I see quite consistently. You have this dirty, wet, disgusting mop bucket. And guess what? The larvae aren't in the mop bucket. The larvae are in the mop head. So you can imagine too, when somebody goes to use that mop head and they're just spreading larvae all around whatever they're mopping. So yeah, good stuff in there. But if we know we have this problem, if we know that we're always going to have this source, can we exclude that area? Can, you know, is this a little maintenance room that if we make sure that door is well sealed, we keep the mess inside this room and not let it get out into the processing area? I had one case that, trying to remember which fly was the issue on this one. I think it was forward flies, actually. It was a bakery. And it was an old bakery. And so the floors, you know, over 100 years tend to shift a little bit, and the floors weren't flat anymore and draining to the drains. So every night when they did a wash down, all that dough and stuff, there were certain areas that the water just didn't get to the drain, and the water was standing there. And of course the water was standing there with all the dough pieces. And now we have an issue. And this was going to be a major renovation, and they couldn't do it right away. Obviously, they're not going to shut down 24 hours later and be like, yep, tearing down the facility. What we did is we actually built kind of like this plastic wall around this one area. We knew it was going to continue to be a problem, but what we were able to do is exclude the flies to that one area and make sure that they didn't come out further into the processing area. So when we talk about exclusion, it's not just the outside from the inside. It can also be on the inside to prevent them from moving around more, especially when you have big projects that this is going to cost a lot of money and a lot of shutdown time. That can't be done right away. Again, I love to make it sound easy. It is not easy. So let's talk about traps. There are a lot of good insect light traps that are out there. Any products that I have up here, it's just because these are the pictures that I stole from the internet. I'm not saying that these are the best ones that you should use, but you do need to use the one that is right for the situation. These big industrial models are great because we've got 2 or 3 light bulbs, so we got nice output. The output goes forward, the flies go in there, they get stuck on the glue board. There are times that we may want something a little bit different. And I will say these insect light traps, especially our bigger models, really good for the large flies, but those small flies don't fly very well and fly very far. So unless that source is very close to this insect light trap, they're not going to go there because the light is just not attractive enough for them to leave their little feeding source. So then what we have, these are typically used in homes or office areas, but sometimes you can use these as temporary ones, particularly for the small flies. If you know that you have a small fly problem in a certain area, you can plug in, 4 or 5 of these, find out which one has the heaviest concentration of flies that you caught in 24 hours. Now you know where to really hone in your inspections. So these aren't great. I mean, it's a little wall plug-in, like, a little air freshener. It's not going to do a great job for the entire facility, but it lets you get closer into some of this stuff. We may have some smaller light traps. Again, if we just don't have the room to put that big industrial one, maybe we're going to go with something a little bit smaller. Maybe we just don't have the space for that. So lots of different shapes, different sizes that you can use on this. I will say, this is one thing that, believe it or not, yes, I do see in food facilities. They have a fruit fly issue, particularly in their kitchen or their break rooms. So of course they bring in their own little homemade trap, because let's trap the adults and ignore the problem that's in the gunky sink that hasn't been cleaned out for 3 years. Don't do this. Don't do this. Number one, it doesn't work very well. I mean, it will catch a couple adult flies, but the adults are not your problem. The larvae that are all in the gunk are your problem. So if these are around your facilities, start looking for the source. This is only going to catch a couple adults. That's not going to do it for you. Now, there is one small fruit fly trap that in certain areas, especially smaller areas, so if you do have a break room or a snack room, something like that, offices sometimes, this one can be beneficial in certain circumstances. So this is a commercially available one. This is not a little homemade trap. This actually does work a little bit. Again, finding the source is going to be your best option, but finding that source is not always the easiest thing in the world. I get it. So talking about those traps, lots of different models. Placement is going to be very important. Most of you have probably seen these in your facility, and you see them, sort of by a door, or a personnel door or a dock door. You notice that they're hung there for very specific reasons, because that door is right there. So we want to catch it, right when it comes in that door, so we don't let it get to the rest of the facility. However, that light trap can't be too close to the door that it's actually pulling things in from the outside. So we've got this like Goldilocks thing going on of getting it right in the middle, right in the right spot, that it's going to do the most benefit of catching all those flying insects, which of course brings us back to identification. What is actually on that glue board that light trap is catching? Okay, we did that. Moving on. We did that one too. Okay, obviously I did all that. Again, if you see this around, you have a problem. Stop it. Don't do it. So sanitation and exclusion, super important. This is going to solve the problem, not just put a Band-Aid on it. Traps, a little bit of a Band-Aid, but also a really good monitoring device to point you in right directions. Finding the sanitation issue, not always easy. I get it. Many of the facilities that I've been in, I don't find it on the first time. So what do we do about this? Obviously, communication is big. If somebody is leaving the door propped open 3 times a day, explain to them why it needs to be closed. Something as simple as that might be beneficial and might get them to actually close that door. Documentation is really important. Most of you, I won't make that assumption. Some of you may have a third party that comes in and does your pest control. Some of you may do your pest control in-house. But document these things. Document what you found, where it was, so that if a problem occurs again, maybe it's in the same place, maybe it's different place. But also, if you're going to use any type of pesticide, of course, that has to be documented. So I have customer resources here, but there's lots of good information out there about controlling small flies and large flies. I mentioned the identification piece, lots of good stuff out there. And this is one thing I want to warn you folks about. I know this is a bar. I know most of you don't have this in your facility. If you do, please invite me. I want to go. But what you see here, right in the middle, this is a pesticide. This is a Vapona strip. Now, I'm not sure that you folks have these up there, but the point is this is an illegal application of a pesticide, because that should not be there. The label states that it cannot be in areas that people are in. Obviously, a bar is going to have people in it. So the point of this, and the point of me showing you this, is to say, kind of look for some of these things, particularly if you have large facilities that somebody may decide, oh my gosh, I've got a problem with cockroaches in my locker, in the locker room, so I'm going to bring in this can that I bought at the store. No, absolutely not. That cannot happen, especially in a food facility. So keep an eye out for some of these things. They typically wind up in break rooms, in machine rooms, and things like that, kind of those outside the production area that you might find them. But this is a violation for audit standards. This is a violation of, even label standards. Again, this can come down to education. This can come down to talking to people about it. And of course, communication involves talking to everybody. So feel free to talk to me. Feel free to talk to Pam. There are lots of great people with a bunch of knowledge about flies, about food processing, about all the kinds of pests that we find in those areas. So, talk to people, ask them questions. Hey, we're kind of dealing with this. What do you think? Bounce ideas back and forth. This is my contact information. You are more than welcome to email me anytime. This goes to my LinkedIn page. Pam will tell you that I post fun stuff every once in a while, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Lots of good stuff out there, especially when it comes to that. So with that, flies, they suck. They carry diseases. They feed on nasty, gross stuff, but they're a fact of life, and we get them in there. So one more thing is, as we kind of close out, just want to leave this wonderful video up and give you a sense of how quickly this can happen. I had a dead chipmunk because I trapped out a couple chipmunks from my yard, and I would just leave them there. And I have some great pictures of how quickly these insects will find this dead material. It's amazing how quick they can come in and find this. And I mean, look at the eggs. You can see the eggs right on the top there. And I mean, this is 2 days. So the adults have laid, what, thousands of eggs on that turkey, chicken? I don't know what it is. But yeah, gives you that sense of what's going on. So, oh my gosh, and I have questions in the question box. I totally forgot to look. All right. Oh, lots of questions. Yeah, start typing those questions in. We've got time, and I can hang out even for just a little bit longer if we've got tons of questions. But again, feel free to reach out to me with any of your questions, anything that's going on. So love to talk bugs. All right. So what do we got here? Okay. Angela, if the housefly can transmit all these things to humans, yes, nasty. Can they spread COVID? Great question. So as soon as COVID came out, they did start doing tests, and they found out that the large flies could not carry COVID. It's something to do with the virus and the fact that the virus is mostly respiratory for humans. So no, they have not found any of the large flies that can transmit COVID, which is a great thing. Okay, what if we need to open the door, not completely cleaning, but between production runs? Yeah, again, nothing is perfect. It's very easy for me to sit here and say, shut the doors, keep the doors shut all the time, but people have to come and go. I mean, again, it kind of becomes a Goldilocks issue for that. How much do you really need to have that door open? Can it be shut a little bit more? Is there something, can you get a screen for that door? And even to the point of, making sure that the outside, your perimeter is pretty well maintained so that you don't have those flies right up against the building. So having that door open for that period of time may not be as much of an issue. So it is tough. I mean, if pest control was easy, then we'd have all these problems solved. So yeah, for the person that asked about, leaving the door open for a little bit, it's very much that Goldilocks issue. So good questions. All right. How much damage are we doing by not completely cleaning unused areas? Okay. Sanitation is easy. All you have to do is clean everything all the time, which is what makes sanitation so hard, because there's no way to get everything all the time. So I wouldn't say that you're doing any damage, but be aware of where your sanitation spots are and where some of the problem areas may be, and focus on those areas. So if you have an unused area, but it's perfectly dry and there's no food source in there, you don't have to worry about that. You're good. But if it's one of those areas where there could be some food source, maybe that's something that takes a higher priority, and you're looking at that 7-day period. But it depends. It depends on what's in there. It depends on how bad the problem is. So that's a good question. Again, that kind of goes to that Goldilocks point. All right, so that's destroyed. We're done with that. Okay. Let me stop sharing here too. I don't think I had anything else in there. How do I stop sharing? There we go. All right, what do we got next? How often ILT bulbs. Thank you for that question. ILT bulbs, insect light trap bulbs should be changed once a year. They should be changed in spring. Okay, and there's a reason for that because the bulbs really only have good light output for about 9 months. So you want to start that great output at the beginning of fly season, which is going to be in the spring. And so it's really nice and bright all through the summer. And then towards the fall, some of that light output falls a little bit, but you got snow on the ground and those flies aren't coming in. So yes, ILT bulbs once per year. And I would suggest either dating them or of course you've got to record it, but having a little calendar announcement pop up on your calendar, whatever. But absolutely. All right. Are the white bulbs acceptable in place of the purple ones? Ooh. For most food facilities, I would definitely go with the purple ones because the purple ones have the UV output. And what that's doing is getting another layer of light that is attractive to them. I mean, most animals, most insects can see that UV range. And so your white bulb probably is going to have that UV range. So it's just not going to be as attractive. It's better than nothing. If that's what you've got, go for it. But if you can get those, the purple ones, that is going to just do a better job. Oh my gosh. Okay. Got that one? All right. Opinion on air curtains. Oh, geez, you guys have good questions. Air curtains. Air curtains are a great Band-Aid. They're better than nothing. The problem with air curtains is, number one, they're usually pretty annoying to people. And so people tend to unplug them and, make sure that they're not blowing where they should be blowing. Two, you have to position them very, very carefully so that airflow, really gets a solid wall of air, really gets that to the ground. The other problem with them, especially if you've got a lot of good food smells, that air curtain can actually push those smells out and draw stuff in. So if you can't screen the door, if you can't put up plastic strips, if you can't close the door, air curtains are better than nothing. Again, just check the installation. They do have to be updated every so often. They do have to kind of be calibrated because they will lose some of their oomph on that. But yeah, again, it's a good Band-Aid to have if you're stuck and can't use some of the other options. I don't recommend it as a first option usually.